All right, well, first, thank you for including me in this event. It's really exciting to be here. My name is Malia Mason. I'm an associate professor at Columbia. I work in the business school. How many of you have seen this movie, Her? Raise your hand if you've seen the film Her. All right, so for those of you who haven't seen this film, it's a love story featuring Theodore and his operating system, Samantha. Over the course of the film, Theodore becomes enamored with his computer, Samantha. He spends most of the movie staring with a level of adoration and attentiveness that most of us can only dream of receiving from another human being. Some people loved this film. Some people were a little indifferent about the film, but I think everybody who saw it would agree that there was kind of a disturbing kernel of truth in Spike Jonze's commentary on how technology shapes modern relationships. And while it was primarily a meditation on the role of technology in relationships, I think the other thing that it illustrates is just how central a role our computers have in our lives. Our lives sort of revolve around them. I think everyone in the room can probably agree that the evolution of social media and the proliferation of technological devices has led to a pretty dramatic shift in how people spend their time. There are a myriad of implications for educational, professional, social, health outcomes, and I would argue that these implications are, to this point, poorly understood. I've spent my career studying attention, and clearly the development and spread of these technologies have a profound effect on what we attend, how we spend our time, and importantly, for the point I want to make today, they affect what we don't attend as well. So here's where I'm going with this presentation. One thing to just be clear about is these are preliminary results. The second thing to say is that the project, or the data I'm going to present today, are mostly descriptive. I have the habit of slipping into normative talk when it maybe isn't appropriate. So a lot of what I'm going to say is speculative. I invite you to sort of think critically about this stuff. I'm going to first ask the question, what do our students do all day? And it turns out they spend a lot of time on their computers. I'll try to address, well, are they making wise investments? I'll spend some time talking about why I think this matters. One of the things I'm going to assert is that there's sort of a battle for mindshare going on. We're sort of fighting to get a portion of our students' mindshare, and that we're a little less effective than we maybe should or could be. And then finally, I'll add sort of thoughts and reflections that I have, and a reason for us to be optimistic as educators. Before I get too far ahead of myself, let me acknowledge my collaborator, Brett Gordon, who is a faculty member at Northwestern. And then these individuals, it really took a small army of people to make this project happen. I also want to acknowledge the research participants, because it turns out that the data I collect from them is quite sensitive. So thanks for your willingness to be involved. The project, there are a lot of moving parts here. One of the core parts of this is that we install software called Rescue Time on our participants' laptops. They know we're doing this. They agree to it. And the software is commercially available. It tracks which window is active on their computer screen at any moment in time. And what we can do with this is recover which activities these undergraduates engage in. So if you were in my study, I'd know that you were working on a Word document for 5 minutes. Maybe you left your laptop and went to the bathroom. I would know that you left your laptop, you came back, worked on the Word document, switched to Jezebel.com, switched to Facebook, so I know what they're doing, when they're doing it, how long they're doing it for, and how they switch among these activities. If you were a participant in my study, after a month, of me collecting this data, I'd ask you to come to the lab, and I would give you a survey that was tailored to you. And the survey would have the 50 most time-consuming activities that you engaged in over the course of the previous month. I would ask you to, for each activity, tell me how much time you think you spend on this activity, on average in a week. How much time did you invest in it over the course of the previous month? I would ask you, what would be the ideal amount of time you spent on this activity? So I know what they think they're doing, I know what they would ideally do, and I also know what they actually do with their time. In addition, we ask participants for each activity to indicate to what extent they derive pleasure from doing that thing. And we ask them, to what extent is this activity crucial to your productivity at work or school? So we get them to tell us some about how they feel about the work they're doing on their laptops. So we do this after a month. We do it again after the second month with data from their second month of computer use. And while we have participants in the lab, the other thing we do is administer a battery of cognitive tasks that assess their ability to sustain and regulate their attention. All right. So, one straightforward but I think important thing to ask is, what do students do all day? What % of their time do they spend on these computer-mediated activities? So on the x-axis, we have % of a 24-hour time period. And on the y-axis, I have count of people. The data are pretty normally distributed. And what we see here is that on average, these students are spending 17% of a 24-hour period on their laptops. So that's about 4 hours of time. One thing to point out here is that we have no idea what they're doing on their phones, and presumably they're also on their phones. Is that a lot of time? I don't know. Is it time well spent? I'm not sure, but I will tell you this. We went back and we said, let's break this out and look at how they're investing their time as a function of whether they're doing activities that are productive, that they told us are productive, versus not at all crucial to their productivity. And so here's the graph. What we see here is that on average, these individuals are spending 2 hours, or 9% of a 24-hour window, doing activities that they say are productive. They spend almost 2 hours doing activities that they tell us really aren't crucial to their work or to their school. Are the computers there simply for them to be productive? No. Just because they're doing unproductive work doesn't necessarily mean it's a poor investment. Well, I will say this. They seem to think that they're spending too much time on their computers. As I mentioned, we have asked them what would be the ideal amount of time to spend on this activity. And we've asked them, how much time do you think you spend on this activity? So for each participant, we can say, what % of activities do they think they overinvest in? Right? And what I'm showing you here is a cumulative plot. I've broken it down by productive activities on the left and unproductive activities on the right. What you can see here is that at least half of participants, that's that red line at 0.5, at least half of participants thought they overinvest in more than 25 to 30% of the productive activities that they did. And at least half of participants thought they overinvested in more than 50% of the unproductive activities they engaged in. So this is to say that they sort of think that they're overinvesting in a good portion of all activities that they're engaging in on their computer. And that's especially, it's more pronounced for unproductive work. So they spend a lot of time doing things that they say are unproductive, and they will tell us that they think they're spending too much time on it. You might ask, well, give us an example of an activity. The thing that everyone wants to know about is Facebook. So this is the data from Facebook alone. What I have on the y-axis is count of people. On the x-axis, I have % of a 24-hour period that the students are spending on Facebook. As you can see, it's not normally distributed. There's this outlier here, which is amazing to me, 11% of a 24-hour period on Facebook. So on average, 2% of a 24-hour window, or 30 minutes on Facebook. Well, people say to me, well, Malia, Facebook has a purpose, it has a function. I'm with you. It's a great way to coordinate. It's a way for people to communicate and connect. You might say to me, don't they get some pleasure out of being on Facebook for 30 minutes a day? And my response is, do they like it? They love it. They love Facebook. On a scale from 1 to 7, 7 being this is incredibly pleasurable, 6.1 on average. But 30 minutes a day is actually quite a lot of time. 2% of a 24-hour window is sort of 2% of your life on Facebook. And I think the important thing to say is invariably when we ask them, they think they spend too much time on Facebook. Now, to this point, I've been talking about the percentage of time that these individuals spend on various activities, the percentage of time within a 24-hour window, as if they have a 24-hour window to work with. And in the end, I think all of this matters because they don't have 24 hours to work with. These students, like most of us, have severe constraints on their discretionary time. This is something I just, it's not really based on anything other than my intuition, but if we assume that students sleep for 8 hours a day, if we assume they spend 2 hours getting food, whether that's cooking it or getting it in the dorms and eating it, if we assume they spend an hour on personal grooming, 4 hours in class, and maybe it takes them an hour in total to get from one place to the next. If we assume that, it means they really only have 8 hours of discretionary time to work with. And so when I say that they spend 7.1% of their day on unproductive activities, that is more than 1/5 of their discretionary time. They spend another 1/5 of their discretionary time on their computers doing productive work. And I am by no means on sort of solid ground to argue this, but I would suggest to you that some of the behaviors that educators care about, informal learning, studying that doesn't take place on a computer, getting some exercise, I would think that some of this stuff is getting crowded out. And again, that's because we really only have 24 hours in a day. All right, and so this sort of brings me to my assertion, which is that I do think that there's a battle for mindshare going on with everyone in the room. There's a battle for students' mindshare for sure, and I suspect that some of you already suspect this, and that this data kind of confirms that we're perhaps as educators not faring as well as we like or maybe can. All right, so what do we do about it? Should we encourage students to get on board this quantified self movement, that what they should do is track their computer use behavior, and that if we provide them with some feedback, they might modify what they're doing? I don't know. Should we force students to disconnect, have no laptop policies, promote these internet blocking applications? So do we need to be paternalistic about it? Maybe we should embed pedagogical material into social media. I think to yield the greatest return on our investment, we need to have some sense of why they might be making poor trade-offs when it comes to their time. And so I do think I have some data that can, partially address some of these things. I can certainly ask, does it appear to be an issue of awareness? Is it simply that students don't know how much time they're spending on various activities? On the left, what I have is unproductive activities. On the right, I have productive activities. On the y-axis is the number of records, so number of data points in my data set. And on the x-axis, what I have is discrepancy in minutes per day. So this is what they think they're doing relative to what they are actually doing. And what you will perhaps notice is that the data points are all clustered around 0, which would suggest that it's not that they don't know how much time they're spending on these activities. When asked, they can tell you. If anything, they are slightly overestimating the % of time that they're spending on these activities, which suggests to me that providing feedback in and of itself is not going to resolve the issue. Well, it's possible that what's going on is that some people lack the kind of mental machinery to be able to self-regulate in these electronic environments. If that's the case, what we would expect is that individual differences in the ability to sort of regulate attention can account for the variance in over-investing in these activities. So what I've done here is I've restricted the data to unproductive activities, things that the participants said were not useful. And I can compute for each of these activities degree of overinvestment. So what they said was ideal relative to what they actually did with this activity. And what I'm showing you here is that one kind of measure of one's ability to sustain attention, that doesn't account for any of the variance in overinvestment. The point really is that it isn't a capacity story. It's not just that some people overinvest because their minds don't work that well. What it does appear to be is a motivational story. So what I have here is I've restricted the data to unproductive activities. And again, for each activity, I know the extent to which the person overinvested in it because they told me what would be ideal. I know what they actually did. And so what I'm looking at here is what's the relationship between how much the person said they liked that activity and the extent to which they overinvested in it. And it turns out when we control for participant, that relationship is very strong. So they overinvest in the activities that they like. Now, I think it's kind of worth thinking about potential interventions through this motivational lens. Let's then kind of imagine how technology can solve the problems created kind of by technology. I have a thought. I suspect many of you will have better thoughts, but here I go. So someone should develop an app, and if they do, I'd like some equity in this. And the idea here is there are lots of activities that students love, get enjoyment out, or are highly motivated to pursue. So let's just say that I really want to learn a second language. That's so important to me. I might, there could be an app that I say, all right, I only want to spend 30 minutes a day on Facebook. That's it. And I want to spend about 2 hours a day learning this second language. And so what this app might do is provide them with a counterfactual. Once I hit my 30-minute quota on Facebook, a clock comes up. And it starts to count down the time that I would spend on learning this second language. The point is, it's not simply enough to tell people how much time they've spent on these activities. I think what you need to do is give them the counterfactual. Remind them that there are other things that they get pleasure out of, that they care about in the moment, because I think it's just too easy for them to lose sight of the trade-offs that they're making. All right, just some final thoughts and a reason to be optimistic. I'm not saying Facebook is bad or doesn't have any value. I'm not saying online education is a mistake. All I'm really saying is that people are spending a ton of time at their machines. They're doing things that are unproductive. They think they're spending too much time on their machines. And the question is, should we be concerned about it? Do we value other things that they could possibly be doing with their time? We did a follow-up study. We asked individuals who were in this greater project, do you want to be involved in this follow-up work? And about 45 people said yes. And what we do is we ask them, if you could choose one activity that you would try to do less, what would it be? And it turns out that 96% of people say, I want to spend less time on Facebook. Then we say to them, all right, if you could recover the time you spent on Facebook and allocate it differently, what would you do with it? And this is, I think, the good news. On average, they tell us they would allocate 37% of that time to studying, which to me suggests, while we may not be as effective as we can or should be, we have a seat at the table. They do care. And I think that actually that's really all I have to say. But I look forward to your thoughts and what is here.